This short training video is going to cover the usage of the small arms or infantry firepower chart. To confirm that you have the correct chart, always locate in the upper left hand side the small arms firepower little nomenclature up here, and don't confuse it with your artillery fire chart. Next, to basically utilize this chart, you make a decision of which of these 6 lines is going to be your basic line to utilize. You'd come off to the right side to determine how many figures can bear on the target within the arc and things of that nature, and these whole numbers represent actual figures of the infantry or cavalry unit, or skirmishers. You would then from here come down to generate a set of 2 percentage numbers, and which percentage number you utilize is based upon the target classifications which we have over here on the left side, and the class of firing of the unit. So in recap, it's basically determine the line you utilize here for type of target or type of unit that's firing, or their formation. Determine the number of figures it can fire, gives you 2 percentage sets, cross and down, and then you have to know which type of firing class your actual firing unit is. Most units typically are B. And then once you determine that, you have 2 lines to determine if it's like a mass target or if it's a limbered or open order target, which would give you your final base percentage value prior to any terrain or range or any other modifications which might be utilized, which are found in the firepower modifier table down below. So let's do some examples. You have a common 6-figure French infantry line battalion firing at a common Austrian battalion at normal range, that's basically for muskets 2 inches or less, and all 6 figures can bear for both units. So I would look through this line and find, okay, it's a 3-rank formation firing. It's also it's not the head of a column, it's a basic linear 3-rank formation firing of 6 figures. So there's our 3 or 4 rank line. You come out here until you find 6 figures. There's the number 6. And from here I go straight down. I'm B-class firers and I'm firing at a linear target. Well, I have 2 numbers to choose from, 65 and 52. So I have to look over here to the left side and say, is this a mass target? No. Is it within an inch? No. And is it in a building? No. Therefore, I have to use the linear / open order target line, and it would come across my base percentage of being 52%. Basically means, without any of the modifiers found on the modifier table below, it's 52% to inflict the loss of a figure on that opponent battalion. And conversely, most likely it's a simultaneous fire phase, they have exactly the same chance to inflict a loss back on myself. If you happen to be using a 2-rank English line, for example, and it's a normal range shooting, again the same 6 figures, I would use the 2-rank firing line. Notice it's a lot better shot. It comes all the way out here to 6 figures, drops down if it's the same type of target and range, and since the English are A-class firers, my final percentage would be 85%, because I have to look under Class A firer linear out here. So they're a lot better firing, but there again, that was their training. Now other items and usages here. Class A, Class B, Class C. These are the different types of firing grades. And these 2 lines underneath each are exactly the same in verbiage. The first line represents mass or infilated targets, something which has got more than 1 rank or you're shooting down its flank. Within an inch means that the guys or those standing figures are within an inch to each other at some point, so that it's point blank range firing, less than 50 yards. If the target happens to be in a building, we use a mass line because the building is a mass target, but it's going to be adjusted considerably once you get into the firepower modifiers. Typical musketry against buildings is a 1/10 effect, so it's really piss poor firing. Other than that, you have to utilize at the start what type of initial firing formation you're in, or there's actually a range modifier here. Anytime you do long range firing, which for muskets is more than 2 inches in the 2 to 4 inch band, you automatically use the max range line column, unless you are a skirmisher formation, and I'll come back to them in a moment. But otherwise, you automatically use the max range. So even though you're in a 3 or 4 rank line formation, but you're not in normal range, therefore you have to come up to the max range chart. Notice that the max range chart also utilizes any infantry which is in close order infantry which is in a building, automatically uses this chart, irrespective to if it's actually at point blank range or not. Last, if you're a morale disordered unit, you automatically use the max range chart at any range. Consequently, you have to look up the number of figures that have possibility of firing in the arc and all that good stuff. Once you figure the number of figures, again, you come down and find the relative two percentage choices to do based upon the type of target is the one that you make the final decision upon. So all these lines represent here massed or maximum range, close order in a building. The unit firing is a close ordered unit in a building, or it's in a state of morale disorder, utilize this top line. Now, if you're in a square formation and you're in normal fire range, i.e. within 2 inches of the enemy you're shooting at, then you would utilize this line, and you only count 1/3 of the figures in the square. So if it's a 6-figure square, only 2 figures effectively are going to fire, and you utilize the 2-figure count here and go down for your percentages. If you happen to be mounted close order cavalry, not in skirmisher mode, there's your lines that you utilize. If you are any form of a 3 or 4 rank infantry formation, or you're at the head of a column formation of any nationality, this is the line you utilize. And if you're a 2-rank formation in a firing line, not a column, or a 4-rank line, by the way, also, you would utilize this line for the numbers to come down to the percentages. Now, last but least, I was holding skirmisher or open order formations for last. Skirmishers or open order formations automatically at any range will utilize the open order skirmisher fire at any range line. It's basically the infantry are sniping away at 100 yards or 200 yards. They're just someplace out there in between the armies, and they're shooting it away. So they use a uniform table always. Again, the number of figures that can bear, we're firing off into the blue typically, comes down to a base percentage to chance. Now, with all that being covered, let's go down to the modifiers chart. Once you figured your base percentage in the upper part of the chart, the 50% for example, you then have to determine if there's any terrain or formation of the enemy type modifiers. And there's a whole list of modifiers here. But don't be deceived or thinking this is a horrendous thing to memorize. Most of the time, these modifiers are generally not in use. They're typically for unique situations. But there are some common ones which come up quite commonly. If the unit is behind like a low stone wall, target behind lone stone wall, and you're firing musketry, it's half effect. Now what that means is you take your 50% and times it by a half, which reduces the number down to actually a final percentage of 25%. You took 50 divided by 2 basically. If they're in a medium woods, which is a common woods, where you only have a 2-inch range to start with, again, it's half effect. If you happen to be in a class 2 building, your common wooden stucco type buildings with some minor stonework, it's a 1/10 target. Which basically means if you had a 50% chance to hit the person or the unit, you're now down to 5%. If you're shooting at a unit that's in an open order formation, it's a 1/4 effect. So your 50 would drop down to 12 and a fraction, which rounds up to 13%. Again, they're all under the small arms column here of the modifiers. And after you've studied this chart a couple of times and run a few games, you're going to know these modifiers off the top of your head. They're very simple, they're very basic. Last but thing, when it comes to figuring out the final percentage, after you've done all the times, figured your percentage, you've adjusted it for all the modifiers, etc., at the final point, if you have a decimal fraction, like say 12.2, it will always round up to the next full whole number, i.e. 13%. So therefore, a 0-1 or an 0-1 will automatically always cause a loss. Last but least, we have the case of the random hit. And the random hit is covered by the officer loss table, which is over here. Anytime you roll on a firepower, at any point during the game, it could be ordinary small arms fire, it could be in shock combat, it could be during movement as an opportunity, it could be a pass-by fire, any form of firepower. And the same applies for artillery. If you roll a natural 0-0, which represents 100, or if you roll a natural 0-1, which represents 1%, you get a chance for a random officer hit. And at that point, the player would roll a 6-sided die. If he rolls a 1 through 3, you've unhorsed an enemy commander if they are within 1 foot of your unit that fired. If you roll a 4 or 5, and the enemy officer is within 12 inches of the unit that fired, that officer is actually wounded and has to take a wound check down below. He may or may not be in the game or might be permanently out, or he might be dead. If you roll a 6, the range extends out to 2 feet from the firing unit. So if Napoleon's trying to prowl around behind the lines, he might suddenly get hit in the foot with a musket ball, which may or may not kill him for all we know. Might end the Napoleonic Wars right there. So keep this in mind. Even if your officer is not attached, there's always a chance for a random officer hit at any point during the game when the people are throwing the dice for firepower. This same officer loss rule applies exactly the same for artillery. If you get a natural 0-0 or an alt-1, same rules apply just like for infantry fire. So hopefully I've given a good explanation of this chart. As you can see, it's fairly easy to utilize once you understand the steps. You look at the type of firing unit and or the range. If it's long range fire, you're automatically going to be on the max range line unless you're a skirmisher. Otherwise, you're going to have to look at the type of formation of the unit that's firing to determine which utilized line you use. Figure out how many figures can fire or bear within range, find that value. Then go down. Gives you 2 percentages for each target firing classification. Most armies typically are B. And once you've got onto those 2 percentages, you then have to determine, is this a massed, enfilade, within an inch, or in a building type target? Or is this a linear or open order target? Whichever one it is, you come out and gives you your base raw percentage, which then you take down to the bottom and modify if there's any modifications required. If the 2 figures or 2 units are standing out in open ground and there's nothing in between them, this is the final percentage, unless there's something else that's a scenario generated result.